Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. If one were to diagnose the collapse of Western moral order in the 20th century, one would have to look not merely at the cultural symptoms, but also at the subterranean currents that fed them. So the poisoned wells of desire, as one can call them, that were first dug in the intellectual salons of Europe and the publishing houses of America and the academies of the West, that eventually flooded into bedrooms, classrooms, parish halls of ordinary men and women. So pornography's availability is one, the normalization of sexual indulgence without responsibility, the rise of a culture that mocked chastity while deifying desire. None of these arrived in a vacuum. All of these were the result of a long series of historical concessions and ideological assaults that ultimately declared war on the human person, the family, God himself. The great shift began in earnest when two particular events, you've got a series of others, but two particular events of the early 60s. First was the arrival of the contraceptive pill, and the second was the publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. When the FDA approved the pill in 1960, it was heralded by many as the dawn of a new liberation for women, supposed emancipation from the tyranny of fertility. The pill didn't simply alter medicine, it altered the biology of women to a degree. Because with its arrival, modern man attempted to claim the power to sever the intrinsic bond between love and life, between union and procreation. Paul VI would later warn in Humanae Vitae that contraception would lead to conjugal infidelity and the general lowering of morality in culture and society, that men would lose respect for women, treating them as mere instruments of pleasure. His prophecies have proven true with uncanny accuracy. The Anglican Church had fallen in 1930's Lambeth Conference on this issue, and the moral repercussions for them and for virtually every Protestant denomination in the world have been nothing short of catastrophic. At the same time, Betty Friedan's book became a manifesto for second-wave feminism. She argued that women were trapped in a comfortable concentration camp of domesticity, and that true fulfillment lay in the embrace of careerism and self-assertion. So that's right, get out of the comfortable concentration camp of the home, where you can build a home and raise children in the image of God, no less, and get into the comfortable concentration camp of the industrial office. This critique did not arise in isolation. It was accompanied and amplified by the new glossy pages of Cosmopolitan magazine. This was under the leadership of a woman named Helen Gurley Brown in 1965. She baptized the creed she took Friedan's assertions and supercharged it. She baptized the creed of sexual experimentation, adultery, and consumerist indulgence as the new norm for women. So the Cosmo girl was held up as the new aspirational archetype, liberated, promiscuous, career-driven, utterly detached from the rootedness of covenant family life. And behind these movements lay deeper ideological currents. The neo-Marxist thinkers of the Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse, for example, insisted that the oppressive structures of Western society, like family, religion, traditional morality, these had to be dismantled to achieve true liberation. Marcuse's Eros and Civilization was particularly poisonous because it blended Marx and Freud into a cocktail of radical sexual liberation that called for the overthrow of bourgeois restraint, as they called it. So the family, which was once the bedrock of civilization, became recast as an agent of repression. Western heritage itself, with its Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian foundations, was lampooned as patriarchal, oppressive, inherently unjust. By the 1970s, these critiques had entered university classrooms, dominating the humanities and eventually filtered into pop culture, music, film, television. These intellectual engines accelerated. The institutional church in the West was losing its once commanding hold in the public sphere. In earlier centuries, Christian teaching could shape laws, customs, public morality. By the mid-20th century, the church found itself sidelined. Secular government, elites, they mocked them, and the church was increasingly ignored by the faithful themselves. The Second World War had left Europe physically shattered and spiritually adrift. The horrors of Auschwitz and Hiroshima seemed to many as proof that Christian civilization had failed, and into this vacuum stepped a secular religiosity. It clothed itself in the garments of politics. For many, salvation was no longer to be found in the gospel of Christ, but in the ideologies of feminism, Marxism, or liberal democracy. The American public sphere witnessed Christians gradually ceding ground. Yes, Christians, we let this happen, often becoming more invested in political victories than in fidelity to Christ and his gospel, often interpreting Christ's teachings to suit our own whims. The secular Christian who voted with zeal but rarely prayed, who spoke with passion about party platforms but with embarrassment about the teachings of Christ, became an emblem of a faith reduced to civic religion. Alexis de Tocqueville once observed, America's greatness lay in her churches, where morality and liberty intertwined. By the late 20th century, many of those churches had lost their prophetic edge, content to bless the currents of the age rather than confront them. It's in this context that pornography, once confined to seedy backrooms and whispered rumors, exploded into widespread availability. The Supreme Court's 1973 Miller v. California decision redefined obscenity standards. It opened the floodgates for pornography, making it a matter of community standards. Into that, you have Hugh Hefner's Playboy empire. It transformed the sphere of the public view of sexuality. It glamorized pornography into a mainstream lifestyle. What had once been hidden became celebrated. What was once shameful as an addiction became a badge of supposed liberation. The sexual revolution achieved its triumph, the commodification of desire and of women. Into this darkness, however, stepped two prophets of radiant light, Karol Wojtyła and Joseph Ratzinger, later known as John Paul II and Benedict XVI, respectively. You and I probably don't even realize how blessed we were. Both men had seen firsthand the denigration of human dignity under totalitarian regimes, the Nazi occupation in Poland and the suffocating secularism of post-war Germany. Both discerned with clarity that the true battle was not merely political but theological. At stake was man's understanding of himself as a being created in the image of God and destined for covenant communion. So Wojtyła's theology of the body, it was not a marginal reflection, it was a systematic recovery of the biblical vision of man and woman. Across 129 Wednesday audiences from 79 to 84, John Paul II unfolded a theology that presented the human body not as an instrument of lust and pleasure, but as a sacrament of God's love, a visible sign of the invisible reality of divine communion. And against the reductionism of the sexual revolution, he taught, man cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself to the other. Gaudium et Spes 24. Sexual union was not to be severed from procreation or fidelity. It was meant to image the inner life of the Trinity, a love that is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Pornography's degradation of the body was thus a desecration of the very icon through which man is meant to image God. Ratzinger, for his part, taking lead from John Paul's leadership in that regard, advanced a biblical theology of covenant, which, by the way, John Paul borrowed from to some degree, that offered a sweeping remedy to the disease of secular religiosity. So in his works such as Introduction to Christianity and later as Benedict XVI in Deus Caritas Est, he reminded the world Christianity is not an abstract philosophy, it's not an ethical code, it's a covenantal encounter with the living God, who is love himself. The covenant, renewed in Christ's blood, reorders human existence around worship, fidelity, communion, against the idolatries of politics, ideology, and consumerism. Benedict insisted that man's deepest hunger is not for autonomy, but for adoration. Together, these two great figures stood as brothers in arms, intellectual warriors who confronted the rising tide of dehumanization with the weapons of truth and beauty. They saw that the collapse of Western morality was not merely the result of bad laws or poor tastes in entertainment, but the logical fruit of abandoning God's design for human love and human society. Where the sexual revolution preached liberation, they proclaimed gift. Where pornography had taught men to consume women, they taught men to cherish them as icons of God's glory. In that light, my friends, the poisoned well of our desire may have flooded our civilization, but there's living water in the heritage of these two men, in the scriptures and the perennial teaching of the church that they upheld to their last breath. And all of this still flows from the side of Christ. This alone can cleanse, heal, and make all things new in our culture, society, and the West. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.